friends, welcome to episode 8 of Vibe with Venerables, 1 hour of live drama and dialogue where you get to talk directly to a respected Venerable. I'm Meng, co-founder of Buddhism.net and your host. Today, we continue to have my beloved friend and admired teachers, one of the greatest Zen masters alive, Roshi Joan Halifax. Last week, I talked about Roshi's impressive bio. She founded Upaya Zen Center, she co-founded Mayan Life, she authored 9 books, she spent decades caring for the dying, and she used to lead yearly expeditions into the remote mountains to deliver healthcare. And Roshi is 83 years old, and she literally spent her adult life serving the poor, the sick, and the dying. Wow, such a person actually exists in this world. But there's something even more impressive about her that I did not mention last week. And the reason is I wanted you to experience it for yourself first. And that is the way she looks at everybody with those compassionate eyes. And you can see it even through Zoom. Right? That's the power of the compassion that comes from her. So if you're looking for somebody with a physical body, who spent her life fulfilling the Bodhisattva vow, and you wonder what that person looks like, my friends, you're looking at her right now. That's how amazing Roshi is. So today, my friends, Roshi is here to talk about Bodhisattvas in the Charnel ground. She will explore the Bodhisattva attitude and talk about how to meet the suffering in our world today. So Roshi will speak for roughly 30 minutes and then answer your questions live. And as a reminder, this session will be recorded and then uploaded onto YouTube later. So, Roshi, can we start by inviting you to open with a prayer?
Yeah. What I'd like to do, and I have to find it. Wait 1 second.
1,000, 2,000. Okay.
No.
Kidding.
Yeah. Last week, I think I opened the talk with words from Shantideva, partly because you and I both share a connection with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. And, those words are words he often cites. This is kind of a version that is what it is. But it goes something like, for as long as space remains and as long as beings remain, may I too remain to end the sorrows of this world. And today, actually, I want to start this talk with the words of a contemporary American or contemporary woman poet, Adrienne Rich. She wrote this in 1977. Let me share it again. My heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. I have to cast my lot with those who age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world. So I offered that because part of me is sitting with the charnel grounds of our world today as I bear witness in the various ways that I do, whether it's through the news or being with people who are dying, being with clinicians who are facing such extraordinary challenges, but also to know that I will just keep showing up moment after moment to the best of my ability, which of course waxes and wanes. And also knowing that practice really sustains this capacity. So maybe we should just take a few deep breaths together. And breath really deep in the body, this precious human body. So fortunate that even though some of us are sick, some of us are facing death, some of us are grieving, still we're in this body and we can do something in this life, which is to develop this aspiration to truly be a benefit to others, bravely. So breath deep in this body. Again, this precious human body. And bringing your attention to the sensation of the in-breath. And then the exhale that follows. And the next inhale, naturally arising. Allowing us to kind of let go to the grasping that's so strong in our lives, or many of our lives. And the exhale. And at the end of that exhale, this kind of pause or openness or gap. And the inhale arrives on the shore of the gap, on the shore of openness. And remembering really why we're here. I think anyone who is here today or who also witnesses, joins the video later, I think we have a common aspiration, which is to really understand that we can open our hands in a life-affirming way to benefit others. So thank you for your practice. May it benefit not only you if it has, but may we use whatever little grain of goodness to benefit others. And Meng, thank you. Really, thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, Roshi, the floor is yours, and the ceiling and everything in between.
Okay. I don't want any of it.
Always I belong to you.
Okay. Recently, I had, last week after our time together, I had a bilateral heart catheterization. And there were no blockages in my heart. And I was happy about that. But I also know there are blockages of another kind. And, those blockages are probably natural to many of us. And that is, the time when we grip hard, when we face various kinds of suffering, whether it's within our own mental continuum or whether it's in the world. I think I said last week, but I said many things last week, but I can say it now that, what is happening with the more than 30 wars on our planet today. I can't turn away from these wars. They're natural for me to look at the results and the causes. And this is called charnel ground practice. So maybe some of you don't know what a charnel ground is, but it's a place where corpses are put. It's a place where the body decays. It's a place where yogis and practitioners come in order to meditate deeply on the truth of impermanence, on the construction of our sense of subjectivity and the dissolution of it by being in the midst of this coming apart of form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations or inclinations, and consciousness, and the body, the constituents of the body, earth, water, fire, air, space. Yeah, so charnel grounds, but it's not just where corpses are brought, where yogis practice. It's in our very lives. And this is, I think, a really important part of what I want to address today briefly, so forgive the brevity. But it's to understand, and this is from the point of view of neuroscience, just as we brought attention to our breath, which has an effect on our parasympathetic system, which is associated with rest and digest. So also compassion has a profound effect on our, for example, inflammation system in decreasing inflammation in the bodies. So it's interesting because charnel ground practice is us turning toward the suffering in this world with compassion, not fear, not aversion. And it means, taking into account the first noble truth and teaching of the Buddha, the truth of suffering. Not that life is suffering, but there is suffering in the world, and that world includes us. And the roots of suffering and being free from suffering, and then the path out of suffering. So charnel grounds where we are, or not all of us maybe, some of us are invited to practice. This is the work of my teacher, classman Roshi, whom I have to thank, and also Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a long-time teacher of mine. Going to where suffering is, not separating ourselves from suffering, letting us learn from suffering, but also not throwing ourselves into the churn of suffering in a way that we're re-traumatizing ourselves. Lots has to be said about that, but that's not the subject of this talk. But it's important to understand that we have to titrate, if you will, our exposure to suffering in a way that allows us to be resourced and learn, and not to further harm ourselves. But not all of us have that opportunity. Sometimes we're thrown right into the churn, and it's really tough. And so these charnel grounds, which are in our society and in our environment, yesterday it was Memorial Day, and I went up in a vehicle to the altitudes of this New Mexico mountain wilderness, past these absolutely luscious forests of ponderosa trees and aspens, and there came into a zone where everything was burned. Everything was just burned to the raw earth. And then in certain parts, I saw standing dead. And on the ground, though, the earth below, just the beginning of aspens growing. Reminding me of the words of Du Fu, whom I quoted last week, "The nation is shattered, mountains and rivers remain." And in part, those lines composed during the horrors of the Tang Dynasty and the Anshan Rebellion, Anlushan Rebellion, those words, reflect the situation that we're in right now. Yet it's also important to understand that charnel grounds also exist between our own ears, our aversion, our fear, our grasping, our consumerism, our just utter naked greed, or just being stoned or confused, deluded, apathetic, futile, and so forth. Charnel grounds, all of these. So, that's what I want to talk about today. And gosh, I hope I haven't spent too much time defining charnel grounds. And there's much we can say, but we again reiterating what I shared last week. The Buddha didn't hold himself apart from the social suffering of his time. And he addressed it by shifting things in a really interesting way. As I reminded people, he flattened out the caste system. He ordained a serial killer. He ordained women, thank you so much, and so forth. And I think it's also important historically to understand that the Bodhisattva ideal, which I'll address briefly here, has roots deep in the early earth of Buddhism. And it refers, the term bodhisattva refers to the previous lives of the Buddha. The Buddha also is a young person in his so-called final life, although I think there are many awakened people, maybe not to that degree in history. In his final life, as he was moving toward full awakening. And wonderfully, the Jataka tales of early Buddhism were just such a powerful incubator for the later Mahayana unfolding of this Bodhisattva ideal. And we know that the paramitas, whether it's the 6 or the 10, the perfections that are part of the wonderful canon of the teachings of the Buddha, within these ideals or practices rather and realizations, they're really important for us. That they include, generosity and integrity and patience and wholeheartedness and concentration and wisdom. These are familiar to so many of us as practitioners. And they're a way for us to practice and to realize the Bodhisattva ideal as a path of discovery, as a path of practice, and also as a path of transformation. But I think there's some interesting aspects of the Bodhisattva ideal that are important for us to explore. And I keep working on these valences or aspects because they're very, in a way, they're contemporary, but they're also based on historical Buddhism. And they're also, I think, interesting for us to look at in relation to the polycrisis that we're in today. I just want to say a few more things historically. The Mahayana movement and Venerable Tipton Children and myself, Meng and others, we're all in this, the Mahayana world, but also Meng is interviewing wonderful teachers from the earlier tradition, Theravadan Buddhism. But what we know that when monks and nuns and lay followers began to be magnetized by and devoted to this path, which was not just for monastics, but which was open to everyone, and which also was characterized by this bodhisattva ideal, which has the focus of, we're awakening for the sake of all beings, not just ourselves. And this is a defining element of the Bodhisattva ideal, and it's something that is deeply encouraged in the cultivation of this altruistic motivation, and also of receiving the Bodhisattva vows that we see in many of the schools of contemporary Buddhism today. Certainly, in the Mahayana world. But I just think about Bhikshu Analayo or, she's Vajrayana, but, a number of Theravadan teachers really emphasize this altruistic motivation and how important it is for us to cultivate a bodhisattva attitude, something that Roshi Norman Fisher has spoken about, this unshakable, as he says, attitude of clarity, one that reflects our very character. It reflects our point of view. It's also the internal atmosphere that colors our way of seeing the world. And also, it's an attitude that is saturated by Appamada. And I love this term, and I don't have time to say much about it right now, but it's often characterized by heedfulness. That's how we translate it commonly, or vigilance. But I really like how Stephen Batchelor translated it. He calls Appamada care. And I add also two other C's. There's care, there's conscientiousness, and there's compassion. Appamada. So bringing care, conscientiousness, and compassion to our lives. So these are things that are really important for us to look at from the point of view of the Bodhisattva ideal and the Bodhisattva attitude, or at least this is my opinion. And one has to do with something I keep emphasizing, and that is this power of fostering interconnected communities of integrity and care. And this power is about inclusion, it's about intimacy, it's about interbeing. Recently, I gave a talk on solidarity. It's about solidarity, how we share common values and join together as communities to address suffering and to engage in actions that are about transforming the great difficulties in our world. And these communities are characterized by a sense of individuals who have deep moral character. But there's a term that was recently brought to my attention that I think is quite interesting. And that term is Sympoiesis. And this is, I think, a beautiful term, and it means creating together. Creating together as a kind of fundamental aspect of life in which there is both identity and diversity. And what creates together, we come to understand, also belongs together. And it's about relational realization or relational understanding. And this is found in the context of communities that are not boundaried, but that are intersectional, also within the context of our lived experience. And recently someone sent me these words that are quite fascinating about this. An oak tree grows out of an acorn. A plant grows out of its seed. That seems self-evident. It is correct, but it also is wrong. What's missing is the other half. We also need to say the environment becomes the oak through the acorn. If we can't see these two together, we don't have the living world. The environment becomes the oak through the acorn. The leaves, the branches, the trunk, the roots. It's a beautiful statement. It's to really understand this in relation to a community, not just the fourfold community of monks, nuns, lay men, lay women, which I spoke briefly about last week. But it's to understand the coming Buddha is the Sangha, but the Sangha is interbeing with all beings and things. And that is an extraordinary vision of our world, to see we are not apart from the very environment in which we are embedded. So I said I was going to do 7. I hope I have time, but I'm just going to go briefly. This second really important aspect which I feel is associated with our contemporary relationship to our world from the Bodhisattva perspective is that of hope. Hope that is wise. Hope that is selfless. Hope that is non-transactional. One that is not attached to outcomes. And I'm just going to quote the great Czech statesman Václav Havel, and I often share this quote. Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. This is wise hope. This is what shows us, or what lets us understand that what we do really matters, even though how or when it may matter, or whom it may impact, or even recognizing that it matters. These aren't things that we can really know. What we care about, how we live, our actions, what we care for, what we do really matters all the same, no matter the outcome. And then next, the third thing that I want to talk about in relation to bodhisattvas in the charnel ground is that bodhisattvas are at home in the midst of radical uncertainty, and we are in it. And, what we realize or need to realize is that our lives and all existence is characterized by fundamental precariousness. And this kind of capacity to be at home in the midst of uncertainty means that we are comfortable with the experience of not knowing, of being in the atmosphere of fundamental openness. And then moving on, this fourth aspect is bodhisattvas don't seek easy situations, and they live without fear. And this is coming back to what I spoke to earlier of charnel ground practice. Developing the resilience and openness to live fearlessly in the ground of suffering. And I quoted something from Kuge, Flowers of Emptiness by Ehe Dogen, this blue lotus blooming in a sea of fire. That when we turn away from suffering, try to protect ourselves from it, this lotus, this wisdom compassion, closes down and is non-accessible to us. And then, of course, this fifth aspect, moving on, is that bodhisattvas actualize universal compassion. A kind of compassion that is not just toward our in-group, that is certainly not prescribed. It is spontaneous. It is seamless. It is completely aligned in a surprising way with whatever is arising in the field of suffering in that moment. I have a lot to say about compassion, but I think most of us get the picture. It's, yes, we cultivate this openness of not knowing so that our response to suffering is not bound by rules or algorithms. It is completely spontaneous. And then the next great gift of the Bodhisattva is we look at our contemporary experience of Buddhism. But also Shantideva points out this, and that is joy, but specifically revolutionary joy. And my good friend Rebecca Solnit, who I'm happy to say she'll be our scholar in residence here at Upaya, mid-August to mid-September, she wrote this. She said, joy doesn't betray, but sustains activism. And when you face a politics that aspires to make you fearful, alienated, and isolated, Rebecca says joy is a fine initial act of insurrection. Recently, I read Dr. Keltner's wonderful book on awe, and he speaks about moral beauty. And this, for me, is in part what elicits this sensibility of joy. And this refers to these unself-conscious acts of virtue that just inspire awe in others. And I think so often of Malala and her courage and her staying the course of what she felt was aligned with what it means to be a young woman and the potential to actualize in one's life as a young woman, service in the world through education. That's just one example. She brings me joy. Jane Goodall brings me joy. Joanna Macy brings me joy. And then this seventh in this list of sort of great powers that seem to me about relevance in relation to our circumstances today, and it's that of imagination. And this points to a kind of generosity of the heart and mind that is fundamentally free of narrow views. And I remember this koan, the monk asked Bajang, what is the gateway to the Bodhisattva path? And he said, generosity fundamentally is that you let go of narrow views. You let go of the idea that things are small and tight, graspable and possessible. So it takes a lot to let go of narrow views and to open our hearts, to open our mind to natural abundance. This very well understood, but more difficult to actualize state of generosity. Generosity. So I'm going to finish up in a minute or so, but I often think that, Avalokitesvara, they don't put their hands over their ears when they hear the cry of suffering in this world. Or Ksitigarbha Jizo Bodhisattva, not afraid to go to hell. In fact, goes there with their arms uplifted, their kimono sleeves dropped, and all those who wish to be harrowed from hell can jump in, and I'm ready, so to speak. And thinking about Samantabhadra, of compassionate action, not self-righteous, but actually engaged naturally in awakened action. Or Manjusri Bodhisattva, who's not caught in conceptual frameworks as a way to defend themselves against direct experience, but their capacity to see deeply, their sword of perception, if you will, to cut through all of the kinds of filters that separate us from things as they are. Their sword is an ally. And that clarity of wisdom is present. And knowing that bodhisattvas have this realization that fundamentally there's no ground to stand on. That this moment is groundless. It's radically uncertain. And also, as such, it's completely full of possibilities. You know, Ehe Dogen said, you know, once the heart is grasped, I would say maybe that translation, once the heart is open, you are like the dragon when they gain the water, like the tiger when they enter the mountain. I think what Dogen is pointing to is really coming home right now and being intimate, open, coming alongside or connected to whatever is happening in this moment, whether it's the charnel ground or the pure land, whether it's the Cold War, the hot war, the cold surgical theater, the heat of desire, practicing in the midst of the fires and the freeze of this world. This is our home ground as well, whether we like it or not. And it's inspiring to me to know that there is this ideal of the Bodhisattva, that there's this Bodhisattva attitude accessible to us if we but feel, if we but let ourselves discern deeply and bravely. So I think that right now I will finish so we can open up to some questions, but my hope, wise hope, is that you and I can meet this world with integrity and courage, and with love and compassion, and with uprightness. Recently, something I listened to or a teaching I gave, I was reminded of the Zen teacher Yunmen, who advised a monk who asked, you know, what is the teaching that Shakyamuni Buddha prescribed or preached throughout his life? And Yunmen responded, this is one translation, but this is what I think is quite important, particularly in relation to our understanding of compassion. Yunmen said, an appropriate response. And I think what Yunmen meant by an appropriate response is one that is aligned with things as they are, and yet living by vow, having the uprightness to actually be in that alignment naturally, or to the extent that we can. So thank you for listening, and let's just take some time for some questions. And I hope this has been at least somewhat helpful to some of you. And I thank you for being with me this morning.
Thank you, dear Roshi. It was helpful, at least to me. I was all by you, and you bring me joy. So we have a question from Peggy and then Priyanka.
Thank you. I was so moved by what you had to say, and I hope I can refrain from being so emotional when I ask for your advice. I have spent so much of my life concerned about the environment, and worked as a researcher, then as an instructor. And though I'm no longer teaching, I continue through activism and now through my practice. But my advice is, I was so light bulbs went off when you were talking about so much of what we go through is like being in a charnel grounds. I felt like when I was teaching and researching that I was walking amongst it, and I sometimes let it consume me, but I could still find joy because there were people like Jane Goodall and countless others. And I've had, my life has taken a different turn, and it turns out in a beautiful way, but I was diagnosed with lung cancer a couple of years ago, and I'm blessed with being free of cancer. But what that has moved me to, because I have the gift of my life, is to help others through this journey. And I'm about to go through training to help others. But as I've begun to work and be in group visits more closely with people who are far sicker than I've ever been, I feel the fear of walking into that charnel grounds with them. And I'm wondering what advice you could give me so I can be there for them and be blessed in the same way that I've been. Thank you.
Well, that's such a powerful question. And it's beautiful to see in the screen behind you the trees, the lungs of our planet.
My beloved forest that I get to walk in every 2 weeks.
Well, it's the lungs of our planet, and lungs are associated, of course, with sorrow, with sadness, with grief. And you have been through something obviously so dramatic, having your own lungs occupied by unruly cells. And so it is with this world. And I think that, I don't like giving advice. I just gave advice for, 30 minutes, sorry. But I first want to say I really honor you for your concern about being activated by working with people who are sick. I really understand that. You've been through it. You know that journey yourself. And you've had your own plunge into the existential inquiry into mortality and to the body going out of control, so to speak. I think that's a lifelong inquiry, honestly. So what is important, I feel, in this work of coming alongside those who are sick is to be very sensitive to what what you're able to do in a way that doesn't cause harm to yourself. And we have a phrase, and it's in my book, Being with Dying, and it goes, may I see my own limits with compassion, just as I view the suffering of others. May I see my own limits with compassion. But I also want to say, may I see my own capacities brightly, or in whatever way. I just made this up. Just as I view the potential that others have. So it's finding that, not kind of shrinking before the face of suffering or retracting from it or jumping into it in a way that causes a kind of trauma for yourself or harm to yourself. It's having, through deep practice, but also in your relationship with peers who are doing this work, really understanding, what is the right dose for me? What is the right dose for me in this situation? And not going to the pathological altruism path, which means, throwing myself on the altar of suffering to be sacrificed and, rendered messed up, if you will.
I've been there and done that too.
So I see you get it already, so I don't have to say any more. Thank you. That's such a great question.
Thank you.
So I'm glad you're doing better. And I'm happy the forest is
I'm
there
too.
with you.
Thank you, Peggy. Priyanka, please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Roshi. I was so inspired by your talk. I almost had the urge to cry so many times. And what I'm struggling with is that I see a lot of people in very deep addictions these days, and it makes me very sad because I have a very close friend who I'm losing to alcohol addiction. And I was so attracted to your talk because that's exactly how I feel, and I'm thinking about this person. I see other alcoholics Today I saw an alcoholic man just lying in the middle of the road, with vomit all over his body. Nobody was caring about him. And I asked people if we could help him, and they were like, "Don't bother with him. He's an alcoholic. Get away from him." People have no empathy for addicts, and I know they need the most empathy, but I'm so much at a loss on how to help them. Like, I feel so helpless. I just imagine myself in the Charnel ground just yelling because I don't know what else to do. I would love your advice on how to deal with when I think about my friend who has addiction, because I'm losing her and I think she'll be gone in a few years.
You know, I thank you for that question. It's interesting. Just this morning, one of my students, who is just such a compassionate person, sent me a request to talk with the mayor about how we can take care of the unsheltered in our community. And we have a really beautiful project of cooking for the unsheltered. But now the very place where they go for that food, which is leased from the city, is that lease is going to be ended because, you know, difficult people go there, and needless to say, merchants nearby feel threatened, and, you know, with good cause. So first, I think that there is the direct warm hand of serving those who are unsheltered. And, you know, there are unsheltered probably in every community in this world. And they need direct service, you know, whether it's medical or food or clothing or a place to sleep out of the elements. They need social services, psychological services, and so on. And whether it's done, you know, just having a bag of socks in your car, and, you know, there's a homeless person, you know, selling newspaper from the median, you know, where on the street, where you stop, and just handing that person socks is already a blessing. And there are roots to that suffering. And that is called structural violence. Those roots are economic. Those roots are military. Those roots are class and caste. Those roots are education, and those roots are political. And so individuals who are, you know, caught in the grip of being in the field of unshelteredness, you know, without any social shelter, not just the physical shelter, we have to also consider the institutional, political, and structural violence that gives rise to a whole tribe of hundreds of thousands of people suffering on the margins of our own society, our affluent society. And, you know, I was talking with someone yesterday saying that, you know, just incredible sorrow, and it was Memorial Day, and I felt it in so many ways. And I'm saying, you know, if we just took the military budgets of the world and ended war and turned them toward the environment, into society, in building health within our society, we would have a near perfect planet. We would have a sane world. This is something the Buddha would, you know, feel great about and urges us to do. Bodhisattvas, the same. And yet we spend all of these resources destroying our earth. Just think, you know, what these weapons of destruction have done to poison our earth and to kill beings, not just human beings, but beings of every kind everywhere. I just think it's madness, absolute madness. So, you know, it's looking at the greed, hatred, and delusion. This is right in the canon of the great realizations of the Buddha. and why practice is so vital. But even people who practice go off the rails all the time. And it means, like, the Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara picks up all suffering beings, takes them across the sort of great river of life to the shore of freedom, nirvana, turns around and sees the whole, world is repopulated by suffering beings. It's like, and tears streak down their cheeks, but also 100,000, 10,000, 1,000,000, 100 hands and eyes appear to the extent that is possible in our lives to turn toward, in whatever way we can, to end suffering. Even one thought is better than ignoring it. And so, we're making one heck of a mess. And that's why I bring, instead of, the conventional wonderful teachings of the Buddha, which lots of people are engaged with and I think are so important for people to study and practice with, but I like to bring another perspective, and that is that the sense that I have of the importance of social and environmental responsibility at this time, and finding the scale of action that works for you. It doesn't mean, 1 million, 1 billion, just even one person that you can serve. One bag of socks to the man standing on the median selling that newspaper, hoping to get $1 for some food. Does that make sense? Well, let's do it. And thank you for your question.
Thank you, Priyanka. Okay, we have about 5 minutes, so Jiwoon has the last question. And Jiwoon, please unmute yourself.
Can you advise on how we can cultivate Bodhisattva's mind or compassion? Because I often notice myself see the suffering of the world, but still my heart is closed and I'm just in my head and I feel nothing. But so I feel ashamed, but I want to cultivate this mind. And also I do think not only practitioners, but also lay people, we really need to increase this mind, especially considering what's happening in the world currently. Can you advise on this topic?
Well, first of all, I think I'm going to see you soon. Is that right?
Yes.
I know. I'm so happy we get to meet in person. Thank you so much. You're coming at a time when some really remarkable indigenous people from the Americas are going to be working with us in planting what is called the Three Sisters Garden. And part of it is to understand, which you'll hear from Porter Swensel, the impact of genocide of indigenous people in the Americas. But the same is true in Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and many other parts of the world. And, part of this work that I'm always encouraging is to do charnel ground practice and to also study and learn, but most important is the direct experience of not sitting in your laboratory only or in your library only or in front of your computer only. It means coming alongside in your lived experience the truth of suffering at a scale that is appropriate for you. It could be your dying grandmother, or even and most especially for many, your old dog who's now diminished in capacity. Excuse me. Finding a genuine way where your heart, your natural bodhicitta, can be stirred up from the very sort of ground of your being. And that is what I feel is, the research in compassion is not just through the medium of imagination. It is literally in the context of our lived experience. And it's also, in terms of our practice, to understand that our own minds have all kinds of yucky stuff. And so it's to not be hijacked by the yucky stuff in consumerism and distraction, but it's actually to understand the truth of that suffering too. So that's just a little, I don't want to say advice, a tiny prescription for you to try out and to extend in a way to others, warm hand to warm hand, or to heart. And I look forward to meeting you on Friday when you step into this very unusual place. And Meng, I hope you get here one day.
Yes.
It's really, June will tell you after she's finished her time here. It's really unusual. Thank you for your question, June.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Roshi, can you lead us on a closing dedication and bless all of us?
Yeah. So I always like to close with the Four Bodhisattva Vows. And but I want to thank you so much, Meng, and also Angela, for making it possible for me to sit here in my little living room and to share a little bit. I hope it's been useful for a few of us at least. So creations are numberless. Vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. Vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. Vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable. Vow to embody it.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. My friends, let's all bow to our teacher. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Roshi, thank you for being here. And most of all, thank you for being born, for all our benefits. Being born sucks. I know that, but you did it for us. I mean, probably more than once. So thank you. So friends, as a reminder, this recording will be uploaded onto the Buddhism.net YouTube channel in a couple of days. So subscribe, share with all your friends. And if you are inspired to practice dana or generosity towards Roshi, please donate directly to the Upaya Zen Center. And as usual, we will share the link on chat and by email. So you won't miss her. So no excuses. Kidding. For those of you who miss Roshi, today this is the last week she'll be with us for this round. If you miss her, don't worry. We do recycle our venerables because it's good for the environment. So you will see Roshi again sometime in the future. And starting in 5 days from now, we will have 5 weeks worth of wonderful talks from the monastics from Sravasti Abbey. 5 venerables for the low price of 1. And this episode is brought to you by the number 5. So this series will start with the amazing Venerable Thupten Chodron, whom Roshi and we both love. And the 5 venerables will be talking about love. This is going to be the summer of love, my friends. So don't miss it. And we'll see you all in a few days, 5 days. And with that, my friends, thank you all for being here.